Hello everybody and welcome to this video. Today I'm going to be walking you through how I made this wooden signet ring using a few basic tools. Alright, without further ado, let's take her away. I start by taking measurements of both my thumb and index finger, as they're roughly the same size, and those are the fingers I intend to wear the ring on primarily. Traditionally, signet rings are worn on one's pinky or small finger, but I have a predilection for index and thumb rings, so I decided to go that route instead. I make sure the caliper is moving around freely and it's not cutting off my circulation. Once I have a measurement, I lock it in and move on to selecting the right size spade bit. These drill bits are used for boring larger diameter holes quickly. I prepare for drilling. Then it's drill baby drill. Just in case, I decide to make redundancies, as I don't expect to get it right the first time. This will prove useful later on, as you will see. Now, it's time to separate the individual blanks using a jigsaw. Not quite there yet. I draw on the crude shape of the ring using the hole as a reference point. Next, it's time to remove some of the bulk and get in the rough shape of the ring. For this, I am using a disc sander to speed up the process. This could just as easily be done manually using a file or sandpaper. However, since I have the tools, I'm gonna take the path of least resistance here. I probably should mention here that the tray on which I'm sliding the wooden blank around is set to exactly 90 degrees in relation to the grinding surface, to keep everything nice and square. Alright, getting closer. Once I have my crude ring shape, I need to finalize boring out the hole before I can even start thinking about thinning down the walls any further. Using smaller bits of rough sandpaper, I use my finger as a guide to grind the inside of the walls exactly perpendicularly. It is surprising how much control can be attained using such a simple technique. After much sanding, I reach my desired width. Now, it's time to use the disc sander once again to further thin down the walls closer to the final thickness. The disc sander left a bit of a burr, so I just run the blank through the sandpaper a few times to even out the surface. Moving on, I need to thin down the base or the bottom part of the ring in relation to the head or the top part. In other words, to get that tapered V shape when looking from the side. I use a pencil to draw on the surface of the plane where I intend to sand and shape the blank. After that, applying differential pressure, I slide the wooden blank across the paper. I press down more at the bottom part of the ring at first, to grind away more material. Then I even out the pressure and work the taper up to the top. If the line is not moving up equally as visible here, I'll make a mental note of it and compensate on the other side, where more material needs to be removed, by pressing down harder as I grind away until the lines are matched once more. Just like this. Then, I continue applying even pressure as the taper moves further up. Then, I repeat the same process on the other side, once again making sure the line is creeping up evenly. Unfortunately, I was a bit overzealous and made the base, that is the bottom, of the ring a little too thin for my liking. Therefore, I decided to continue on with the second ring I've been making in parallel off camera. My contingency. Switch in 3, 2, 1, bam. Movie magic. I'll pick up from where I left off with the first ring and resume with this one. First, I go at it with some sandpaper and good old elbow grease to bring the general shape and size of the ring down closer to what I would feel comfortable wearing on a daily basis. Not bad, getting there, but still quite bulky. I go back to the literal drawing board to start outlining the final shape of the ring, using the hole as a reference point. This process is important if I want to keep everything even and well matched on all sides. These guides will give me an easy way to remove only the needed material, while shaping the ring in a balanced way. Back to the sandpaper. I angled the ring in a way to remove the wood up to the guidelines I drew in the previous step. This will ensure that the head or the sealing surface of the ring will stay a nice and symmetrical rectangle. I repeat this step on the other side, sanding just until I reach the guidelines. Nice. Looking better. Then, I follow up with some hand sanding to blend the shoulders in nicely, replacing that stark angle I just put in there. At some point, my cat decides to join me to provide moral support. Next, I need to thin down the top portion of the ring, as it protrudes too far away from my finger, making it impossible to fit inside a glove. While doing so, I use a caliper to ensure the height remains roughly the same on both sides, measuring from the highest point of the hole. Next, some rigorous hand sanding ensues, trying to round the walls and reduce the ring down to an acceptable size while keeping it even and symmetrical. At this point, the ring still feels and appears a little too big for my liking, so I go back to the drawing board to scribble in some new and hopefully final guidelines in order to continue proportionately reducing the size of the soon-to-be ring. Once again, planning out the shape patiently, ahead of time, and drawing on the guidelines allow me to see how much material to remove from each side to keep everything even and well balanced. I commence the sanding, taking great care to control my movements, checking after each pass, making sure I'm grinding parallel to the guideline I drew. If the initial couple of passes are not parallel, I make small adjustments and favor the other side until I reach an even grind. Then I just log that angle in and continue to the line. Once I reach the line on one side, I move on to repeat the process on the other side. That looks pretty damn good to me. I follow up with some more hand sanding to once again blend this angle I created on both sides into the rest of the ring nicely and gradually. This is also the phase of the process where I'm working on the final thickness of the ring walls, so I take great care to pause after every few passes to compare all quadrants to make it as symmetrical as I possibly can get it. Now that I established the final thickness of the walls, I want to match the thickness of the head or the top part of the ring. With controlled strokes, I start sanding away the entire area, applying even pressure. I want to go no thinner than 4 millimeters, as one day I intend to engrave or maybe carve something into the final cast version of the ring. Same goes for the shoulders and the walls. This is the reason I decided to leave them relatively thicker. I use my caliper once again to measure the thickness on either side, measuring from the highest point of the hole. I probably should mention that at this point, I'm using higher grit sandpaper for a smoother finish on the ring. It also helps with the fine-tuning and adjustments at this final stage of the process. If I don't pay attention and mess up, I don't mess up too bad, and should still be able to fix the issue. Within reason, that is. I do a few strokes to flatten the ring out just ever so slightly, and draw out that rectangle on the sealing surface. Lastly, we arrive to the final stage. The ring has reached its final shape, and now I'm only working on rounding down the corners all around the ring. For this, I make sure to take the same number of strokes on mirroring sides, keeping everything as symmetrical as I can. I'm also working at an approximately 45-degree angle in relation to the edge. At this point, I'm pretty happy with the final product. Just one final test. Yep, my riding glove fits right over it. Good to go. And with that, I present the final product. The reason I made this piece of jewelry is to use it as a template in a mold in order to ultimately cast a silver version of it. Stay tuned for that one. Till next time.